Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host of the show. Our guest this week is Margalit Fox, an award-winning obituaries writer for the New York Times, as well as a former book review editor. Her latest book is the true story of a POW escape, The Confidence Men. We'll be hearing all about it in today's show. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're also live on Margalit's Facebook and Twitter accounts, and my own personal Facebook page. If you're watching, please make sure to press play on the video so that if you have any comments, we'll see them. And make sure to like, comment, share, mention your friends. We want to have as many people watching as possible. As I mentioned, my name is Neil Parekh, and I am the executive producer of the show. I'll be guest hosting today. Sri is out of town. It's always an honor and a privilege to take the host chair. And we've been doing this. Sri's been doing this show for 5.5 years, coming up on 6 years actually in October. I've been producing this show for about 3.5 years myself, and I still remember the first time he gave me the reins. He gave me the login. Can you believe this? He gave me the login for his Facebook account and said, "Have at it, Neil. We want to make sure the show continues." And I've always taken it very seriously and really appreciated the privilege of doing that. Let's go ahead and say hi to some of the folks joining us. Our friend Patricia Freudenberg is watching from New York. Patricia, you're going to love this show in particular with our focus on obits today. We always look at the obits. We always talk about the obits, but we're going to have Margalit Fox, who's written some incredible obits in her time. Rajni is joining us from Toronto. Rajni, great to see you. Deborah Kerr is joining us from Fort Lauderdale. Deborah, thank you. Hope, I'm not sure, don't know my Florida geography that well. I'm sure Paula Kiger, our producer, will school me on that, but hopefully Elsa wasn't too bad for you in Florida. It certainly hit the East Coast. New York, in particular, got hammered. We got a little bit here in Washington, D.C., but certainly want to make sure that folks are staying safe. Our friend Jonathan Borstein, right? Hopefully I got it right. Is watching from the East Village. He was our guest for a special Pride edition 2 weeks ago. We did take July 4th off, but Jonathan was our guest. What a fascinating discussion. Jonathan is a flaneur in New York, and if you don't know what that is, either watch the show from June 27th or ask Jonathan in the comments. If you're watching, I assume he's watching on Sri's Facebook account. One of the things, again, to note, depending on where you're watching, you're going to be able to interact with people who are watching on that particular channel. So if you're watching on Sri's Facebook account, that's who you'll be able to chat with. If you're watching on my Facebook page or Margalit's Facebook page, those are separate audiences, but we can bring them all together here on the screen using StreamYard. Another special guest waking up early from Seattle, where she's visiting my sister and nephew and the rest of the family. My mom. Hi, Mom. So glad we get to talk at least once a week. Kind of. I mean, you listen to me, right? And I take your comments. So that's kind of like talking, right? Ellen is joining us from New York. Diana is joining us from Hogan Farm in Whiting, Vermont. So Diana is usually on the West Coast in the San Francisco area, San Mateo, but on the East Coast. So Diana, you don't have to wake up too early to watch today's show, which is great. Let's see who else. Diane Stefani joining us from Margate, New Jersey. Our friend Stephen Kaplan joining us from Ramsey, New Jersey. Stephen, always good to see you. Ted Coltman joining us from Washington, D.C., close to where I am here, literally just outside the Beltway, 2 blocks from the Beltway, in fact. Paula Kiger is joining us from Tallahassee, Florida. I mentioned her earlier. one of our producers for this show. Miriam Berkeley is watching from Hell's Kitchen, New York, and she always appreciates the show. Thank you, Miriam, really appreciate it. And she says, I get a lot more than from her digital subscription. We're glad you're a digital subscriber. We're glad you're a Sri Sunday New York Times read-along loyal viewer. Paula is sharing the geographic insight I was looking for. Look, I know Paula's in Tallahassee, which I don't think got a direct hit, but they're far away from each other, and they didn't get much Elsa. But I will point out what a poorly named storm, Elsa, for all the little kids out there. And my daughter loved Frozen a few years ago. To call a hurricane Elsa, there's just so many things to unpack with that. So we will. And Ellen's saying we didn't get too much in New York City. Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar is joining us. Thank you, Sujana. Always great to have you. Dr. Chandrasekhar is one of the hosts of She's on Call, which is a great medical show that airs at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. She co-hosts that with Marina Kurian. And Susan Gluck is joining us from New York City. So thank you, Susan. So with that, I want to, again, thank everyone for joining us and remind folks, if you're just joining us, our guest today is Margalit Fox. She's an author, journalist, and lecturer. She wrote award-winning obituaries for the New York Times and was also an editor for the Book Review. And her latest story is about a true story about a POW escape. So we're definitely going to talk about that and learn more about her work and her career. But before I do that, I want to do a shout out to our production team. I mentioned Paula Kiger. Rounding out our team, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranauckas. Thank you very much for making this show such a success, being such an integral part. When we went about a year and a half ago now, when we went to producing the show from on StreamYard, it went from, Sri doing the show and my supporting him as a producer and occasionally asking Paula to step in for me, or when I was guest hosting like I am today, Paula would take my role. Everything changed December 2019, before the pandemic. Sri usually hosts the show. I'm usually producing it, playing videos, putting up cards, putting in comments, etc. That left Paula to be in Facebook every Sunday. So it really changed things, and it really made a huge difference. So thank you in particular, Paula, for all of the work that you've done to make this show a success. It's a great community that we have built up. We are live on the Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So we really hope you will join us. Continue to join us. And again, thank you, Paula, for all of your work to make that happen. We also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, MuckRack. Thank you, MuckRack, for all of your support for the New York Times Read Along and the great work that you've done with Sri in terms of the fundamentals of social media course. If you're interested in being a sponsor, please contact Sri or myself. Our email addresses are sri@digimentors.group or neil@digimentors.group. And we're producing this show under the auspices of Digimentors, as I mentioned in terms of our email addresses. Digimentors is the consulting firm that Sri started, that I joined last August, coming up on a year almost, in fact. We do social and digital consulting, conferences, summits, webinars, one-off webinars, series of webinars, meetings, hybrid events now. So if you're interested in having us produce a show for you, please let us know. You can contact us. Again, the email addresses are sri@digimentors.group or neil@digimentors.group. And we would love to work with you. We have experience working with small nonprofits, several United Ways that I've been able to work with. We also work with big corporate clients, with Deloitte. We've worked with the UN. We've done several medical shows. So if you're interested, get in touch and we will talk to you about that. So we have several people who have joined us since we did the initial introductions. But I want to go ahead and jump in and bring in our guest, Margalit Fox, so that we can talk about her book. And then after that, we'll go to the paper and look at what's there. So without further ado, I'm going to have Margalit Fox join us.
Thank you, Neil. Good morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you, all of you, for coming. I'm particularly blown away by the person from the West Coast who is here, probably more than one, because even I in New York am never up at this hour. So it's interesting to see how the world looks at 8:43 a.m.
We have a number of regular viewers that watch from the West Coast. I will say the person I did give a shout out to watching from Seattle is my mom. So she'll wake up. She probably would have woken up at 4 o'clock if she had to watch
Absolutely.
the show. She's my mom. But we definitely have a number of viewers that watch regularly from the West Coast. Margalit, thank you so much for joining us this week. Before we talk about your book, and later we'll talk about your work with the New York Times, of course, and the Obituaries. But one thing we always ask all of our guests at the very beginning is tell us about this past year and a half. How have you fared? Hopefully you have been favored with good health, friends and family. But tell us about how this last year and a half has been for you.
Well, better than for many, many people, thank God. I was at the Times for 24 years, and in 2018, I decided to take the plunge and retire early, quite early, and concentrate on writing books full time. So for the next 2 years, I spent every day very pleasurably sitting in an armchair in my little study in our Manhattan apartment with a cup of coffee at my elbow, the cat on my lap, and a book, if it wasn't a heavy book, propped up on the cat, who made an obliging book stand, just reading background literature. I start all my nonfiction books spending a year just reading and then typing up hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes. Then year 2, I sit down to write. So when lockdown came along, my routine changed almost not at all, and I realized that what I had been doing all along was sheltering in place. I just never knew it had a name.
That's shelter in place. That's a good description of what people have been doing. I mean, a lot of times people have talked about working from home. Really, a lot of people have been at home doing their best to work. I mean, it's just a different way of thinking about the world. So in terms of The Confidence Man, this is, of course, your 4th book, right? There are the other books that you've had: Talking Hands, Riddle of the Labyrinth, Conan Doyle for the Defense, and The Confidence Man. This is your full set. Are there others that I missed?
No, that is my full set. I'm working on the 5th one even as we speak, but I'm still in the reading with the cat book stand stage.
Gotcha. So the question I had is, with The Confidence Man, it just was published June 1st, right?
That's right.
Tell us about the timeline for that. Was this a pandemic project? Were you working on this through last year?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I started the reading in 2018. That took me into sort of mid-2019. I started writing after that, and my husband and I were both ill. We were early adopters of COVID. We probably had it. I say probably because at that time, at least in New York, tests were available only to people who were sick enough to be hospitalized, which thank goodness neither of us was. But both of our doctors think it's very likely, based on our symptoms, we had a mild case. But what that allowed, in fact, we had to, which seemed a little bizarre since we both had it, we had to isolate from each other. So I blew up an inflatable bed and basically lived in my study for about 6 weeks until our doctors deemed us safe to go back to sharing a room. And so in odd hours, if I couldn't sleep, because your sleep cycle is so weird during these times, I would get up and write. So I actually finished writing The Confidence Men in a somewhat feverish state during my own bout with this illness.
Wow, I didn't realize that were dealing with COVID. So glad that you got through that. You had to. You said you had to isolate together within the same.
Yes, we did, which is very bizarre. By divine providence, we have a duplex apartment. So basically, my husband became Mr. Upstairs and I became Ms. Downstairs. And somehow we got through it. And it seemed, I'm not sure to this day what the doctors were trying to isolate us from, since each of us had it. But I think they felt discretion was the better part of valor. So, of course, we complied as best we could.
That's a new twist on upstairs, downstairs. I
No
guess.
kidding. No kidding.
Fodder for a sixth book, maybe?
The problem is I was born without the fiction gene. It's a fairly well-documented medical condition, genetic condition, and I so regret being born without it, because writing nonfiction is really hard. There are something like 2,000 endnotes in The Confidence Men, all of which had to be checked by me, by the copy editor, by the proofreader, because you need to, in this era of ubiquitous bad online information, you have to source everything, not only every quotation, but every assertion of fact. And that my New York Times training, particularly my first 10 years as an editor in the book review, prepared me very, very well to do that. But it is hard work. And so I have often lamented to myself, oh, I wish I could just make stuff up and write it down. Not that writing fiction is easy, but it generally does spare you the 2,000 endnotes.
Sure, and kudos to you on the endnotes and the deep research and the scholarly approach. As the husband of a PhD, my wife got her PhD in political science. Can certainly appreciate what that takes to be that committed to the scholarship, to accuracy, to detailing the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you.
So let's go ahead and talk about The Confidence Men a little bit. Again, the Confidence Men is about how two prisoners of war engineered the most remarkable escape in history. You've had some incredible reviews in the New York Times and Washington Post in particular. Riveting, nail-biting, said the Times, enthralling. Start The Confidence Men, and you two will turn page after page, eager to find out what happens next. And in reading that review, can't remember who wrote it offhand, but I believe they said that they usually take notes in the book when they do a review in the margins, etc. And they lamented the fact that they couldn't do that. That your book was so gripping, they could not stop to take notes and really focus.
Yes, that was the wonderful Michael Dirda writing in the Washington Post. And that was a review that authors can only dream of. And trust me, and I've done 4 books now. I've been writing books for about 20 years. So it doesn't always fall that way. But sure. He was very wonderful, as was Chris Jennings in the Times Book Review.
Chris Jennings wrote the Times one as well. And I know Paula will share the links to those reviews. We also have them on our website on digiventures.group. If you look in the top right, the New York Times read along, you'll see the link to this show. So tell us a little bit about the book itself. Walk us through kind of what is the book about?
Well, let's put up the picture of our 2 heroes, if we can. Thank you. On the screen left, the army man is Harry Jones, and his partner in crime, as it were, the airman, is Cedric Hill. And these photos were taken, obviously, in World War I. They were taken around 1915. Both of them fought in the Eastern Front, which is much less well known than the Western Front, but there were all kinds of campaigns there. They were both British officers, Jones on the left fought in the Mesopotamian campaign, became a prisoner of war in 1916. Hill was in the Sinai and Palestine campaign, was shot down, had a one-man shootout in the desert, holding off Ottoman forces for 6 hours before he too was taken prisoner. They were sent to, and let's put the map up now, one of the remotest prison camps in Turkey.
Here's the map
And
that
there's
you're
the
talking
map.
about.
And they were sent to Yozgad, which is all the way over on the right, sort of center right. And you can see the railways don't go there. It is 150 miles from the Black Sea, 300 miles from the Mediterranean, and 4,000 feet above sea level. The camp, because of its remoteness and the incredible harshness of the geography around them, it was surrounded by jagged mountains and then the Anatolian desert beyond. The camp was considered escape-proof, so much so that there was no barbed wire around it. But there was something else that precluded escape even more forcibly for the 100 British officers who were interned there with Jones and Hill. And let us now put up let's do the sketch next. The sketch, perfect. That is a sketch of the camp at Yozgad, and it doesn't look much like the World War II German prison camps we know from the movies. Indeed, no barbed wire. It looks almost bucolic. Well, those were once private homes lived in by Armenian families, and of course we know what happened. We know the history. In 1915 came the Armenian genocide, and so conveniently for the Ottoman military commanders, those houses were all empty. So that's where they put their POWs, and Jones, Hill, and 100 of their countrymen were interned there starting in 1916. On orders of the commandant, if any one of those men even attempted escape, the rest would be punished. They could be locked down, they could be put in solitary, they could even be executed. So these were true British military men of honor. They swore up and down to one another that they would not escape. Jones and Hill, our heroes, longed to escape, but the question was, how do you do that without compromising your countrymen? They came up with an elaborate hoax, what today would be called a long con, played out against their Ottoman captors over more than a year. And this is the mind-blowing thing. At the center of that con was, and now if you can put the board up, Neil, a Ouija board, a handmade Ouija board. It doesn't look like anything like the kind you and I used to buy in the dime store and play with when they were kids. But of course, they're POWs. They made it out of scrap material. It's a sheet of polished iron. They had a raised wooden ring around it, and then they cut out 26 little slips of paper, labeled each with a letter of the alphabet, and put them randomly around the ring. The planchette, we're used to the little plastic table-looking thing. It was an inverted drinking glass. Again, that was all they had. Little by little, Jones, who had been a lawyer in civilian life and had studied psychology, first he realized that to reel in his captors, he would need to foment a groundswell of belief among his fellow British captives, so that belief that Jones could communicate with the spirit world would be widespread enough, there would be a kind of tipping point. Once he had done that, joining forces with Hill, who was an airman and a brilliant amateur magician, they little by little reeled their captors into a con, got them to believe that the spirits could guide the captors to a vast treasure, gold, buried somewhere in the region, if only those captors would lead Jones and Hill, the two mediums, out of camp in search of it. So if their con worked, they would be on the road to freedom, personally escorted there by the iron-fisted camp commandant, with the Ottoman government paying their travel expenses.
Wow.
If, however, the hoax were discovered, it would be a bullet in the back for each of them.
And so, what was, when they pulled us off and they started convincing them of this ruse? What was the response? How did the camp guards respond? And we'll let you answer that, but I just want to let folks know we have a number of questions that have come in that we'll get to in just a moment. A lot of people are interested not just in the story, but in your process, etc. We have questions from Shoba Bandi Rao. Jim Collier sent in a question as well on your Facebook page. Ingrid Bach. So we'll definitely get to those questions. But go ahead. How did they respond to this ruse?
Actually, I want to preempt you for 1 second, and then I will answer that. You said the name Ingrid Bach. Ingrid, my original training was as a cellist, and hello, Ingrid. Ingrid was my stand partner at the New York All-State Symphony Orchestra in 1977. So, wow. She was the principal cellist. I was assistant principal. And so that's a little bit of a side note. Getting back
she said, thank you for your meticulous fact checking.
Oh, thank you, my dear. And Ingrid hewed to the straight and narrow, and as a cellist with the Rochester Philharmonic, I strayed from the path and became an ink-stained wretch. But back to the Anatolian prison camp in 1916. What's fascinating about the con game is it didn't start out as a con game. It started out as a lark. One of the most moving things about the men's captivity was just how crushingly bored they were. They were locked in their houses for much of the time. Every night they were locked down. They were with the same people day after day after day, heard the same stories, told the same jokes. It's lockdown. It's something, strangely, that we can all relate to, having come through the last year and a half. For them, they were courting a psychological malady that later in 1918 would be named barbed wire disease. It was identified by a Swiss doctor named Adolf Vischer, and he identified it based on studies of World War I prisoners, and he found they had nightmares, depression, malaise, and crushing ennui. Again, we've all had barbed wire disease in this last year and a half. So the prisoners were always looking for ways to entertain themselves. They had a few dog-eared deck of cards. They would play poker till they got bored with that. They made somehow a roulette wheel out of an old door. They played roulette till they got bored with that, and so on and so on. One day in early 1917, our chief protagonist, Harry Jones, received a postcard from an aunt in Britain, and she knew that her nephew had these long, empty hours in captivity to fill, so she suggested something he had never considered before, that he and his comrades try experimenting with a Ouija board. And so, as Jones says, few of us were spiritualist believers, but they did it for the same reason they did poker and chess and roulette, just to fill these long, crushingly empty days. So it started out just for fun. Jones, however, was an inveterate prankster, and not wanting to disappoint his comrades, because, of course, night after night, they would try to reach the spirits. Needless to say, they couldn't. So Jones, who had a superb visual memory and had long since internalized the positions of the letters around that ring on the board, he began moving the glass with his eyes closed and creating all these spirits. He's no fool. The first one he created for the 100 trapped male prisoners was a saucy wench named Sally. And so night after night, as the cast of talkative spirits grew larger, more and more men pressed eagerly around the board. Jones writes so movingly, he says, these spirits brought us in touch with the outside world. We could visit Shackleton on his polar expedition. We could dine in the Trocadero. He says it was the closest we could get outside our dreams to a breath of freedom. So before long, he had about 70% of the camp firmly committed to the spiritualist ethos, that it was possible for the living, through a medium, through a tool like a Ouija board, to communicate with the dead. Then it became a question of reeling in the captors, and that too, because Jones knew psychology well, was a very carefully worked out process of incremental steps. Reel them in a little more, a little more, a little more, and then you've got them.
Ingrid loves the saucy wench named Sally. And she also said, thank you for the kind words you said earlier to her. Our friend Patricia Freudenberg is saying that creativity derived from solution solving. These are great, amazing stories, and what a great piece to bring to light. I want to ask you, how did you first hear about this story? What prompted you to write the book in the first place?
I heard about it in the most satisfying way possible, which was looking through an old, dusty, long out of print book, looking for something else entirely. In probably early 2018, when my previous book, Conan Doyle for the Defense, was in production, I started casting around for what to write next. And I took down from the shelves of my home library one of my favorite volumes. It is called Grand Deception, and it's an anthology of pieces by various authors, published at various times, edited by Alexander Klein, and it came out in the 1950s. I was then vaguely thinking of writing a book on pathological imposters, these people like Frank Abagnale of Catch Me If You Can fame, or Ferdinand de Mara, who was the subject first of the book The Great Imposter, and then the 1960 film of that name starring Tony Curtis. And I knew, of course, in a book like Grand Deception, there would be at least one piece on pathological imposters. But when I opened it, what caught my eye, and perhaps I too was guided by the spirits, was an essay with the most irresistible title I have ever seen on a work of nonfiction. It was called The Invisible Accomplice. Well, how can you not stop and read something called The Invisible Accomplice? What is that about? It was an essay by my hero, Harry Jones, published in the 1930s, that reprised his escapade in brief. That, in turn, led me back to Jones's 1919 book-length memoir called The Road to Endor. He took his title from Kipling's bitter poems about spiritualist mountebanks who flourished in the World War I era, who would bilk these Gold Star families, desperate to contact fallen loved ones. And Kipling in turn took his title from the biblical Witch of Endor. When I read Jones's book, my hair stood on end, which you can see takes no small trick. And I immediately did what any nonfiction writer interested in doing something does. I Googled the book, I Googled the story to see if there had been any books on it in the intervening century. And to my wild joy, the only other book was a 1975 posthumous memoir by the co-conspirator, Cedric Hill. Nothing much had been published on it since then. It had somehow slipped into a crevice in history. So I had the great pleasure and the great honor of getting to lever it out of that crevice and look at it with the benefit of 100 years hindsight.
Wow. I want to give a shout out. Susan is joining us from Stuytown. She hasn't joined us in a while, so Susan, good to have you back. And I want to go to some of the questions that came in. Starting going back to Shobha Bandy Rao. She was saying you have a background in linguistics from Stony Brook. How does linguistics help you in your writing?
Oh, what a great question. And in fact, linguistics and music help me in writing in very much the same way. I always say to young journalists, if you have studied music, you already have a leg up, because music teaches you to have give intense attention and care to things like pacing, tone, color, cadence, and rhythm. And nothing could be better for a writer than that. Those attributes translate directly into writing, as we all know. We speak about writing metaphorically with a lot of these terms that come from music, or like color from visual art. Linguistics, too, helps one fine-tune that process even more, particularly in my favorite process of all, probably every writer's, because it means you've finished. You're done with the first draft. You go back and you buff and polish it using finer and finer grits of sandpaper. And so linguistics really helps you think about what are the semantics of the word. If I use this syntax rather than that syntax, will it be easier for the reader to process? So all of those things, the linguistics and music together, have been, and I never set out to be a writer, but they have been an absolute godsend for me in the work I do now.
That's great. Thank you, Shova, for that great question. I mentioned Jim Collier had a question earlier. Jim is a friend of yours, or former colleague, I assume. He's watching on your Facebook page. He's asking, weren't you recently featured in a New York Times acrostic puzzle?
Wow, beats me. I don't know if anyone can find it and post the link. That would be amazing, but I truly don't know. This is the first I'm hearing about it.
Interesting. I'm sure it must have been something about who is one of the best obit writers of all time. Would be my guess at the clue.
Or who is one of the biggest fools of all times. It could go either way.
Either way. Something
either
like
way.
That. But we'll definitely see if we can track that down. Or Jim, if you know which date that ran, if you can put that in the comments, we'll certainly see what we can do to pull that up. Patricia asked, did you ever go abroad in the research for your book? Did you go to Turkey, for example?
No, and there were a couple of reasons. COVID obviously being the big
Sure.
one. The State Department is still discouraging Westerners from travel in Turkey, so that's another consideration. But the paramount consideration was, it was very, very, very unlikely that any archival material from 100 years ago, from the records of the War Office during World War I, would have been preserved. And then I had the dual onus, even if there were documents, of finding a researcher in Turkey who would be able to unearth them, and who not only knew Turkish and English, but could read the old script. Turkish for many, many years was written in a version of Arabic script. It was not until the 1920s that they switched over to the Roman script that Turkish is written in today. So even some of the most astute contemporary Turkish translators would not have had that extra arrow in their quiver of being able to read this old Arabic-based script. So it would have been a tremendous amount of risk and investment of my time and of a translator's time for very, very remote possibility of any reward. So sadly, I didn't get to go.
Sure. And what about, I'm just pulling up your earlier books, Talking Hands, The Riddle of the Labyrinth, Conan Doyle for the Defense. Just in terms of, these were obviously written earlier, pre-pandemic. Were any travel involved with those books?
Absolutely. Talking Hands was, and again, my linguistics background dovetails directly with this. It led me into it. One of my professors, the eminent linguist Mark Aronoff, was a member of an international research team that was studying a newly emerged signed language in a deaf Bedouin community, where because there was such a high rate of hereditary deafness, not only the deaf people, but the hearing members of that community used this newly arisen sign language. So it's, a linguist almost never has the opportunity to see what happens when a language is born, how the human mind makes language. So I did get to go with them on one trip to this remarkable village where, a man could have 4 wives, 20 children, 10 of the kids are deaf. the whole family's speaking in sign, and you look up and there's a camel shambling past the front door. That was an amazing experience.
That's great. I want to thank Vinita Gupta for joining us, watching on LinkedIn, on Sri's LinkedIn. She has a question. What books and tools would you recommend to a beginner wanting to write a memoir? That's interesting.
I would recommend reading the classics of the memoir genre, starting with the one that really kicked it off, The Liars Club by Mary Carr. Both Jeffrey Wolfe and Tobias Wolff each separately wrote memoirs of their upbringing. Jeanette Wall's The Glass Castle, which was on the bestseller list for literally years and years and years. There are so many. And again, I would, if you have the cup of coffee, if you have a cat to serve as a bookstand, I would just sit in every available spare hour and just read in that tradition.
Absolutely. Ingrid says it's weird to think that Conan Doyle might have believed the con that you were writing about. And Patricia thanks you for answering her question with such detail and the history lesson. We definitely appreciate that as well. What I want to do now is to go into the newspaper and show kind of what's in the paper, and then we'll come back to you when we discuss obits, because there's a lot to talk about in terms of your work with obits and some of the ones that you've written.
Perfect. I'm going to have my coffee now.
You have a chance to have your coffee. Thanks, Margalit. Again, our guest this week is Margalit Fox, the author of Confidence Men. It has gotten rave reviews, riveting and nail-biting, said the New York Times. Enthralling. Start the Confidence Men, and you two will turn page after page, eager to find out what happens next. You can learn more on her website, margalitfox.com. margalitfox.com. But now what we want to do is to switch our attention to the newspaper and show what we have on tap for today. So with that, let's take a look at the newspaper. We have it laid out here, and we're going to start. Here's the front page section. Above the fold, big display photo about Chicago and the Great Lakes. Really great climate change story, so we'll get to that. The Sunday Review focuses on the war on drugs. How should we do drugs now? We have to figure out what the new normal looks like. We have the Sunday Style section. This is hurtling headlong into couture. So it's a full page design on the front page. We can check that out as well. The Book Review, Perils of Diaspora. This is a book, The Netanyahus, an account of a minor and ultimately even negligible episode in the history of a very famous family. That's the cover review in the Book Review section. I want to point out the Sunday Business, a very interesting graphic that they chose for the Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg story that's been making around. So you definitely want to take a look at that, about their relationship and how that frayed over the last year or so. And then a headline, Mattel brings Barbie and friends to Hollywood. I was really captured by the Art and Leisure cover, just in terms of the design. I don't think that I've seen them use the reverse this way before, in terms of Arts and Leisure in white over black background, as you see that, and then four pictures to tell the story. So just a little bit of a difference in terms of the way they laid it out. And then the magazine cover story. I know that I'm not going to pronounce this correctly. I've heard it both ways, Lil Nas X or Lil Nas X, but Hot Boy Summer, the subversive joy of Lil Nas X's gay pop stardom. So we definitely want to take a look at the magazine. But let's go ahead and start with the front page section. That display story is the battle between a great city and a great lake. how the lake is starting to encroach on Chicago. And we have the lead is U.S. is reluctant to send soldiers to Haiti conflict. This is after the assassination of their president and dueling claims of leadership from an interim prime minister and I think it was a deputy prime minister. So that is, Haiti has had a long history of instability, and certainly the U.S. is not without blame in that history. G20 endorses proposal aimed at tax havens. Biden's agenda rests on appeal in the suburbs. Here's a story about the removal of the statue for General Robert E. Lee in Charlottesville. And if you remember, 4 years ago, there was a rally there by white supremacists that turned deadly when a car rammed into a crowd and killed one of the counter protesters. This is a story about the presumptive mayor, the winner of the Democratic primary in New York, who will almost assuredly win in the general election in the fall. He has plans for the city beyond secure streets and subways. Here's another Haiti story about a mansion in Canada looking at the use of wealth. So let's take a look inside. My favorite section, always, my favorite column is the Times Insider piece. And this is a piece about Annie Carney, a White House correspondent, and when journalists go on air. So we'll definitely take a look at that when we get a chance. A headline in history, women organize for political power. More in July 11th, 1971, more than 200 women, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents gathered for the first meeting of the National Women's Political Caucus, a nonpartisan group still active today. So that's definitely interesting and worth taking a look at. We're taking a look at later. On page 3, what the Times has done is looking at teasing the rest of the paper. So noteworthy facts. At the end of June, the stock market was valued at 205% of the country's economic output. That's a lead-in for the business story up here. From 1901 through 1932, Germans were almost a third of all Nobel prizes awarded to scientists, 31 in total. Former President Jimmy Carter's family home in rural Georgia didn't have running water until he was 11 and didn't get electricity until 3 years later. That's an article in the Book Review, Carter Reconsidered. So that's, if you didn't have a chance to read through all the paper, take a look at this page 3. You'll definitely get some interesting tidbits to take a look at. You have coined by the writer Neil Stephenson in his 1992 novel Snow Crash. The term metaverse refers to a fully realized digital world that exists beyond the analog one in which we live. That's in Sunday Styles. This is a really interesting article. If you didn't get a chance to see it, this is featuring responses from readers. Stacy Marshall, this is a letter, is simply asking questions and seeking truth. So Stacy Marshall is a woman who was got a farm in Atlanta, inherited a farm, and she went back and discovered that her family owned slaves. A number of years ago, 7 slaves in particular, and she's trying to figure out what to do with that knowledge, what to do with relationships with people, with neighbors who are most likely, descendants of enslaved people. And that's really, I want to highlight the terminology. I've noticed the change from referring to slaves to enslaved people. So that's something definitely should take a look at. I think the question is, an individual really doesn't have the means to manage reparations themselves. It really is something that government should take on, but she's trying to do what she can individually. So let's take a look at what else we have. Here is, I'm going to focus on the ad first. Power of She, powered by We. Athleta. This is a apparel and shoe company that Simone Biles and Allison Felix both joined. Simone Biles, of course, very well-known gymnast, and Allison Felix, track and field champion. And Allison Felix had a major falling out with Nike over the terms of her contract when she was pregnant. So it's really interesting in terms of what Athleta has been able to do. Defy expectations, defy gravity, defy everyone who told you you couldn't, because you can be a mother and a world champion, an athlete and an activist. You can stand up and stand together. You can bring the heat and bring the heart and bring it home, because you are the power of she, powered by we. Really great ad, and that's one of the things that we like to do with the New York Times Read Along is look at the ads and see what they are pushing out. This article on the left under international, this used to be the COVID section. It's under international, but it's a COVID story from India. Mother, when will you come? Despite government aid, thousands of COVID orphans in India could face neglect and exploitation. So an incredible story in terms of how COVID hit India, ravaged India, in fact. Here's an article about post-ISIS investment in an Iraqi city. And this is about the assassination attempt, or assassination rather, in Haiti. Here's a full-page ad. Again, just interesting in terms of, you can pull out, this is the whole page. Black background, some white text. Picasso, not the artist, of course. Second home ownership for 1/8 the cost. That's all they say in the ad. Picasso.com. So check that out. See what they're selling. Because the ad, I'm thinking it's getting a mortgage or finance a home ownership, financing a home. But it'd be interesting to see what else they have on their website. This is more about Haiti. This is the senator's mansion in Canada, a Haitian senator, and how pervasive myths about rape hamper UK's justice system. That's certainly an important story. Fewer than 2% of rape cases reported to the police in Britain are ever prosecuted. I'd be curious to what the percentage is in the US for comparison. And just a quick scan, I'm not seeing that here, but that would be an interesting point to bring up. This is official indifference over a death fuels a mystery in Montana. This is not. I'd like to say I'm surprised. This is certainly. This is the caption: Ayanna Highwolf tending to her mother's grave on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana. To me, this is an example of how First Nations, sometimes referred to as Native Americans in the U.S. have been treated and ignored. Certainly in Canada, we're seeing all the stories coming out about the residential schools and the bodies that are being found. I saw someone share a post that, we probably have similar issues here in the States. In the U.S., we just haven't discovered them yet. Both the U.S. and Canada have a lot to answer for. Here is this story about Chicago. And I'm going to pull back a little bit to show you the full spread. The battle between a great city and a great lake. You can see the bridges in Chicago. There's an overview of the Great Lakes, 5 lakes, one exquisitely balanced system. So you can see Lake Superior here, Lake Michigan, where Chicago is, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and then the St. Lawrence River going out to the Atlantic Ocean. And this is showing some of the erosion. The city beach disappears. This is 2013, and this is 2020. So you can see how they've lost what they've lost in 7 years. This piece is also really interesting online if you get a chance, some really great animation. So let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick, if we can. I'll just pull this up and put this on the screen for you. Here we go. And so I'll just pull this. So let's see what this has. So this is what they did with the story digital. So we always like to show what's going on digital, particularly when there's interesting graphics like this fly-in. So that definitely, and that was a video on their webpage that they showed. And you see some of the pictures as well, the tug of war. This is a better shot of the map. Some video. And this is the erosion that we were talking about. Sewage problem reversing. And there we go, a little bit more of the animation. Really fascinating to see that kind of print, and we always celebrate the print newspaper. There are some things you just can't do in print that are so much better online. I think this is a good example of that. So definitely take your time to check this out and look how rich and detailed the story is. And that's just a beautiful, beautiful shot, beautiful video. So that is great. So let's definitely go back. We'll go back to the paper. And this, you see some of the other, the way they did it, the layout here. I want to point out, I mean, these are some huge pictures on in the print edition, really dominating the page. And to have 2 pages, looks like 4 pages with some nice photography, always welcome. And so we have more of this front page section. This is the article about Charlottesville. Here's an article about the heat dome in the West Coast. Death Valley hits 130 degrees. I want to make special note about the impact on the Pacific Northwest and how hot it got in Oregon, Washington, Northern California, British Columbia as well. The number of deaths are just staggering out there. And so one thing that's interesting about the paper, when it goes to past 22 pages in terms of the front page, the second part is kind of nestled right there. And so I've always thought that, you know, it's not intentional in terms of, I don't know if it's intentional what's on page 23, but that certainly is something that's going to get your attention. It's easy to get to this story about Eric Adams. And I've seen other stories, other headlines on that page 23, which are interesting. So if we continue with the front page, we get into obituaries. And before I bring back Margalit, I just want to point out Peter Zinoviev, British composer and synthesizer innovator, dead at 88. Jahan Sadat, 87, slain leader's widow who pushed to improve women's lives. Anwar Sadat's widow. She was much younger than the former assassinated Egyptian president. Clara Peplos, 79, screenwriter and director who jumbled film genres, dies. And then we get into the death notices. And of course, we want to make sure you know about Missugram, which is a great app on iOS and Android now that you can use to memorialize loved ones. Check out Missugram on iOS or Android. But with that, I want to bring back Margalit. And again, for folks, just as a reminder, our guest today is Margalit Fox, who was a long-time obituaries writer at the New York Times. She also worked on as an editor on the book review. But we want to focus and talk to her about obituaries and learn from her about some of the obituaries she wrote. We will share some of the images, and she can tell us some of the stories behind that. So with that, I want to bring back Margalit Fox to the show. Margalit, thank you very much again for joining us this week. We're going to shift gears now from talking about the confidence spin to talking about obituaries. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about, when you went into writing, when you joined, did you join with the idea of writing obituaries? Was this a goal?
No, and I suspect that the child has not yet been born who comes home from primary school clutching a theme that says, when I grow up, I want to be an obituary writer. It's something that until recently very few journalists planned for, because most of us are old enough to know, I certainly am, that the obit department was kind of the bastard stepchild in any newsroom. It was Siberia. Historically, it was where they sent you if they wanted to punish you for something, but maybe didn't have quite enough on you to fire you. And it was where they sent you when you were deemed to be a heartbeat away from needing an obit yourself. So I joined the Book Review in 1994 as a copy editor and was there for 10 years. It was a wonderful job, wonderful people, surrounded by books. But I had trained as a writer in journalism school. I really wanted to write, and I grew kind of increasingly despondent over time, thinking the only thing they're going to be able to say in my epitaph when I go is, she changed 50,000 commas into semicolons. And for me, wanting to write, that wasn't quite enough. So I started contributing advance obits to the section. As probably all of you know, the obits of people whose lives were very long, very rich, very complex are actually written in advance, all obviously, but the where and the when. I did that for a number of years, and in 2004, when a job in the obit department opened up, I applied for it and was lucky enough to get it.
And so that answers Patricia's question. Did you ever write an advanced obit? Of course.
A great many, and even though I've been retired from the paper since 2018, I will still have maybe half a dozen to a dozen bylines in the paper every year, because when I left the paper, I also left about 80 advance obits in the can. When they run is, of course, in the lap of the gods. I can have nothing for 6 months and then 3 in 1 week, which has happened. But I have the wonderful feeling that I've left enough milk out for the elves, and they have very thoughtfully compiled a 2,000-word obit, fully reported, written, and fact-checked with my name on it, and I haven't had to do a thing. It's a marvelous system.
80 advanced obits, and even Ron is commenting on that. I'm just fascinated by that. Do you have to sign anything when you write an advanced obit that you won't disclose? Anything about that, or?
Oh, no, heavens no. I mean, the Times has an overall policy of not commenting publicly, and of its staff members not commenting publicly on any unpublished story. And an advance obit is, of course, kind of the ultimate unpublished news article.
Yeah.
But so there are about 2,000 on file. And again, I could tell you for whom they are, but I'd have to kill you. But you can make an educated guess, major politicians. If basically what we say is, if you're a president, the king or queen of something, an old time silver screen star, then we probably have your advance on file.
I'm sure. And Patricia added her wow as well. Miriam says that's a natural segue from obits to writing biographies in her estimation.
Thank you, Miriam. That's a wonderful comment. And in fact, funny quick story. One of my sisters is a poet, and she likes to enter these flash fiction contests where you have to write a whole novel in 100 words. I think it's crazy, but she likes it. One day years ago, she called me in the newsroom just to say hello. And when I picked up the phone, the first thing she said was, "So, how's the flash biography business coming?" And I thought, damn, it took a poet to make me understand on the deepest level what it is I do. And they are indeed flash biographies.
That's certainly interesting. And we also have Alex asking, what are the 3 ingredients of a good obit? I think that's a great place to start. And we'll certainly take a look at some of your obits as well. But what do you think are the three key ingredients?
Wow, that's a fascinating question. Of course, what I want to say with that segue is location, location, location. That's not the answer. The three ingredients are research, including research you have to do on the fly. Although we've talked about advances, easily 90% of what I and my colleagues did every day, what my colleagues still do every day, are the breaking news obits reported, researched, written, edited within a single day, sometimes within an hour or two, like any other breaking news article in the paper. So I think the first is the ability to research and assimilate information quickly. Second, and these are both true for any news story, the ability to structure what you've learned in a cogent way for your audience. You need to give them sort of a heuristic information processing model so they can assimilate the information that you have just assimilated at warp speed. And third, and this is the most important, and this is what separates a really good obit from the just leaden curriculum vitae that obits of the past used to be so often, is social context. For me, a good obit is much more than about the passing of one life. It is gives the writer the ability to use that life as a lens onto another era, because obits are the most retrospective genre in the paper. So if you write an obit of someone who was in his or her 90s when they died, was a mover and shaker, would be back at mid-century. So it's very much a way of looking at the past, of looking at the war, looking at the Jim Crow era, both the heroes and the villains of these times, looking at people who made the women's movement, and so on and so on. So it's an incredibly good way of writing and reading social history.
And this really answers a lot of Ron's question in terms of, do they have to be old? What is the signal for these obits? Everyone should write a portion of their own obit. It's an interesting concept, really. How do you want to be remembered? Everyone does want to be remembered, as Patricia often says, but how do you want to be remembered is always interesting. And she thought it was profound, the flash poetic statement that you mentioned. Carla has a really great question. And again, I want to thank Carla for introducing us to the show. Carla is one of our producers. I think a lot of people think of obituary writers as super serious, dour people. After all, they deal in death all the time. Margalit, are you super serious, and do you?
We get that question a lot, and I can understand where it's coming from, but it's a kind of determinism that we obit writers don't have any truck with. It's a job. We try to do it well, but it's a journalistic endeavor like any other. And if you think of an obit of 1,000 words, maybe a sentence or two has to do with the death, and the rest of the 98% of the obit is about life. It is the biography. It is narrative. It is social history. And a reporter would never ask of a journalist who covers Wall Street, do you empty your piggy bank out at night and count all your coins? Or they'd never ask of a dance critic, do you pirouette down the hall on your way to the newsroom? And so too, it's equally, I don't want to say inappropriate, but it's equally far-fetched to assume that obit writers are dour people, depressed and obsessed with death. We're not.
And thank you for obviously for clearing that up. And I think we can actually demonstrate that for our viewers. If you take a look over your right shoulder, I don't know if you know this, you have a chicken on your bookshelf.
Right. Now the
What's
chicken.
up with that?
Oh, this is Mrs. Milligan. Say hello to the people, Mrs. Milligan. And these are
Hello, people.
These are the proto Milligans that come with her or beneath her.
I'm the proto Milligan.
And this gets us back to the confidence men, if nobody minds. Mrs. Milligan is in the book, and she even made the New York Times review. She was very proud of that. Mrs. Milligan, the historical Mrs. Milligan, was a chicken acquired by a group of the gunners in the campaign that my principal hero, Harry Jones, was with. He was fighting with British and Indian forces at the siege of Kut al-Amara, which is on the river Tigris in present-day Iraq, about 200 miles upstream from the Persian Gulf. And the British very foolishly in 1915 tried to make a stand there. They were pinned down by Ottoman forces, surrounded, and actually held under siege for 5 full months. No reinforcements, no fresh troops, no new weapons, and very soon nothing to eat. Mrs. Milligan had been acquired by a group of gunners intended as a dinner. They loved her so much they kept her as a pet. She actually went off at one point, and as I say in the book, became a war bride and returned to the same camp, trailing a brood of chicks, which made the gunners even happier. Sadly, as rations dwindled and they got into the very serious situation where literally 15 to 20 men were starving to death each day, Mrs. Milligan outlived her utility as a pet, shall we say.
I see. So I think that answers the question whether or not you have a sense of humor pretty clearly. We do have a few other questions. Our friend Diana is asking, has anyone ever contacted you in advance of their death to try and influence their obit?
Yes, and we have to be very careful about that. And also families of the departed after the death will sometimes try to stage manage coverage. And you have to, in a very professional way, read them the riot act. You have to say, look, these are not eulogies. Those we leave to the ministers and the rabbis. These are news articles, warts and all, like any other in the paper, because what is an obit really in terms of journalistic genres? It's a profile. And these days, if you're going to do a profile right, you do it balanced. So while we've written about some of the great victors and admirable people of history, we've also written about some of the worst people in history, Nazi war criminals. I did the the obit of Sheriff Jim Clark, the great enforcer of segregation in the Jim Crow South. It was his billy club that was coming down on people's heads as they tried to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I did the obit of Charles Manson because they're newsworthy figures, and that rubric includes villains as well as heroes. So you have to tell families, look, we are going to tell it like it is. Families usually get it. Very occasionally, maybe once a year, I would actually have to tell a family, we need to be absolutely certain that you and I are on the same page, that you know this is not a eulogy. We talk to families as a courtesy and to get biographical information, but we do not take dictation from families. And unless that is understood, there will be no obit. Now, that's a bluff, but I know it's a bluff they're never going to call because they want that obit in the New York Times.
Sure. We have a couple of questions that have come in that I want to put out there. In addition to Neil Genslinger, who is currently on the obit desk, a former guest on our show. He and Amy Panani actually were both guests last fall. Is there someone you've written an obit on that you would want to go back and write a biography on?
Oh, hello, Neil. And Neil is, one of our most brilliant colleagues. Having his byline on our page almost every day is just worth its weight in gold. Well, that was the wrong thing to say because paper doesn't weigh very much, but you all know what I mean. Neil is an absolute treasure. Write a biography? No. I know too many cautionary stories of journalists who have been under contract to write biographies, and as you know, it can take over your whole life, and 10 years pass, 20 years pass, and you don't finish because you're just overwhelmed. So I was born without the fiction gene, regrettably, but mercifully, I was also born without the book-length biography gene.
Those are two interesting genes not to have in your wheelhouse. Miriam is asking, she's often read by obituaries of people she's met, and she's sorry she didn't know them better. Do you sometimes wish you had known the people you've written about?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, Charles Manson, probably not. And I can tell you that was one obit where we didn't call his family. But yes, and in fact, you've put your finger on the nub of really the joy and the privilege of writing obits. And in fact, the best compliment an obit writer can get is hearing from a reader, I read your obit of so-and-so and how I wish I'd known that person. Or better still, I read your obit of so-and-so and I felt I knew that person. Then you can, retire easily to bed that night, have a nice drink, and think, I've done my job right.
Absolutely. Alex, Flash social historian, Flash biographer, Flash student of life. Can't be dour.
Thank you, Alex. That's exactly right. And it's even appropriate to inject humor into certain obits. You have to be very careful about tone. But one of the classic obits I wrote was, it was an advance. It ran about a year and a half ago, was for a marvelous man named Alan Abel. And he was a professional hoaxer. Now, my job was both delightful but unenviable, and I say unenviable because in 1980 he had brilliantly hoaxed the New York Times into publishing his obit. So needless to say, when he supposedly died this time, we all had our hearts in our mouths, but he was in his 90s at this point. He'd been ill. We checked it up and down, or rather somebody else did because I was retired, mercifully, by the time he died. But how can you not write an obit of a professional hoaxer and not inject humor into it? So that obit turned out to be great fun. And even right in the lead, where I said something like Alan Abel, a professional hoaxer who was the subject of a credulous news obituary in the Times in 1980, apparently actually did die on such and such a day. I've never had to write a lead like that and never will again.
Absolutely. And I remember we talked about this obit when either Neil or Amy was on the show, and we'll certainly bring that up. It's too good not to share on the screen. Here is
there he is.
That obit. Alan Abel, a hoaxer extraordinaire, is on good authority dead at 94, and there's the lead. I'll even make it a little bit bigger for folks. Alan Abel, a professional hoaxer who for more than half a century gleefully hoodwinked the American public, not least of all by making himself the subject of an earnest news obituary in the Times, apparently actually did die. What a great lead.
I've never had to hedge so much in a lead, and we all waited for him to rise from the grave a few days later, but so far, nothing. And, I even have my Ouija board. In fact, Random House made up a wonderful Ouija board that's part of its book club kit. I even have my Ouija board, yet Alan Abel has not contacted me to say that he's still around. So I'm pretty sure he's dead this time.
I want to bring up, you mentioned some of the obits that you've written of folks that were maybe you wouldn't want to spend time with. Certainly Betty Friedan, who ignited a cause with the feminine mystique, an incredible obit. Maya Angelou. You wrote the obit for Maya Angelou. Oh my God.
I did, and that I remember vividly the day she died. That obit, like all obits for people with this impressive body of work for whom we wouldn't want to get caught short writing it on deadline, that obit was an advance. I think we knew she was ill. The day she died, I had the day off. I was actually at a routine doctor's appointment, and doctors' waiting rooms always have the television blaring in them. But suddenly her image came up on the screen, and I went to the receptionist and said, "Cancel my appointment." And I grabbed a taxi and ran over to the newsroom, and, as we say, put a top on the advance, the where and the when and the age and the confirmation.
put a what? A top?
A top, a TOP, because when you file it, it's really all but the top, since where
Sure.
someone died, when someone died, how old he or she was, cannot yet be known.
So is the lead, so that this second paragraph, her death was confirmed by literary agent, of course, I would assume that would be the top. You'd add the President Obama statement.
Correct.
Is the lead part of the advance obit?
Yes, absolutely. All but the where and the when. So I would have said Maya Angelou, whose landmark book, et cetera, died, and then blank, or TK, as we say in the business, which stands for to come, died at, and then another blank field, she was, and then another blank field for the age. Confirmation, obviously, is blank, and the survivors, which you want to double check, absolute, or recheck at the time, because more grandchildren may have been born. So a sibling who was a survivor at the time you wrote the piece may have predeceased your subject. So it's basically the top and survivors, and anyone in the newsroom can do it. So what's happening now with my advances is one of my wonderful colleagues will put the top on, get the confirmation, get their survivors, and I can open the paper or go on the website, and there it is, and I haven't had to do a thing. It's marvelous.
Here's the obit for Seamus Heaney, Irish poet. He actually spoke at Wesleyan University when I was there, which was pretty incredible. This was from August 2013.
I'm proud of that one.
So
I remember this, as I said, Times has obits on file for people whose work is complex enough, rich enough. We don't want to get caught short writing it on deadline, but it's a Sisyphean task compiling advance obits for all of the newsworthy undead. So, and our staff is small. Needless to say, there are gaps in the record. Seamus Heaney was one such gap. So that obit I wound up writing on deadline. So I'm particular, and your training kicks in. It's like being an emergency room physician or something. You run on your training, you run on adrenaline. Colleagues help you where they can, printing out clippings, marking passages or quotations you may want to use. So it can really be an all hands on deck situation when a major figure dies and we discover there is no advance.
Breaking news, hospitalized after a fall, had suffered a stroke in 2006. We also have a comment. Gordon Balcom is sharing a link to Obit the film, which I believe is about the New York Times obituaries.
Yes, it is. In fact, it came about as the result of an obituary. Way back in 2009, I think it was, I did an obit of one of these wonderful figures that the Times obit department loves, someone who is a world-class master in a field that you've never considered before. This was a French artist named Eric Joisel, and he was a master origami artist. And I don't mean those wobbly little cranes that we used to make as children. I mean, a life-size rhinoceros out of a single huge sheet of paper. His work was in the Louvre. And when he died, I had the privilege of doing his obit, and my primary source was a young New York filmmaker named Vanessa Gould, who had done a brilliant documentary called Between the Folds about origami artists, and Eric Joisel was heavily featured, and she became quite close to him. So she was the one who was able to give me the family information and all of that. Vanessa became so fascinated by what we obit writers do that she petitioned the Times, and the Times is not forthcoming about opening its doors. It took her, I think, more than a year to get permission to make a film about the obit staff and what we do. And we were very flattered, but we said, Vanessa, it's going to be a bunch of middle-aged people sitting in chairs, talking on the telephone and typing. That's not very cinematic. But as those of you who've seen the film know, and I hope the rest of you will, she made a work of art out of it. It came out in 2017, I believe, just called Obit, and it's absolutely worth your time.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and take a quick moment as we're running toward the end of our time together. I want to just make sure folks know that next week we're going to be joined by Philip Bump, who is with the Washington Post. So this is going to be a unique show for us. Philip Bump is a national correspondent focused largely on the numbers behind politics. And we'll be doing a special WAPO read-along. We usually focus on the New York Times. Occasionally, we actually did go to the home of Mark Fisher, a Washington Post senior editor. And so next week, Philip Bump will be joining us. So we're certainly looking forward to that show. But what I want to do is show the trailer for Obit. And so let folks get a peek of what that looks like. So we'll put that up, and then we'll come back to you for a final word when we finish that. So let's go ahead and bring that up, and we will share this with our viewers. And there we go. And I'm going to just stop sharing for a moment and make sure that I'm getting the audio from this. Let's see here. Are you hearing the audio, Margalit?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I mean, I think it was just starting to kick in. So.
Okay, so let's go ahead and share that. This is some of the adventures when you're producing and hosting the show. You always want to make sure that folks can hear what we're putting out. So let's do this again. And you'll tell me if you don't hear the audio, if you don't mind.
It's fine.
Great.
There aren't too many of us doing this anymore. I mean, you could count them on one hand.
That's Bill McDonald, the Obits editor, talking. Doug Martin, Biff Grimes, Bruce Weber.
People often ask, "Oh, you're an Obit writer. Isn't
That's
it
me.
depressing?"
I was leaning away from doing it. Now I'm leaning toward doing it.
Jack Cadden.
Yeah.
It's kind of a tacit commentary on this old but
Dan
still
Slotnick,
prevalent
Jeff Roth.
Victorian sensibility that Obits have to be demure, respectful, lachrymous, God knows not funny. It's counterintuitive, ironic even, but Obits have next to nothing to do with death, and in fact, absolutely everything to do with the life.
If you have the chance that you can't repeat, it's a once only chance to make the dead live again.
Paul Vitello.
So that's just a quick trailer for that video. Certainly worth watching and digging into. I want to thank you, Margalit, for joining us today. I would be remiss if I didn't mention at least a few of the other obits that you wrote that we want to just flag for our viewers, because I thought they were incredible. I'm a big fan of the work. Shri loves watching obits as well. So let's see what else. In addition to Seamus Haney, there was Adrienne Rich. So we'll pull that up as well. Adrienne Rich, there we go, influential feminist. This was back in 2012. Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are in particular. What an incredible. And then both Dear Abby, also her full name, Pauline Phillips. This is a great picture of her and Epi Lederer, who was Ann Landers. And you did
And they're
the
identical twin sisters.
Twin sisters. So that was incredible. So I wanted to just pull those up as some of the rest of your work. Before we let you go, any final thoughts on obituaries.
Well, obit and final are kind of made for each other in the same sentence, but just read them with joy, because we very often write them with joy, and it is the sheer joy of being alive and of getting to write and read about a life well lived.
That's great. We have a number of people that has, shared comments. Maybe later, Margalit, since we are past 10 o'clock and we want to be respectful of your time, if you get a chance to look at Shree's Facebook page, and I can send you the link. Naomi was asking a question about writing the obit for the amazing Randy. Neil was asking a question about a lot of the writing that you've done after leaving the obit desk. And so, Neil, thank you for watching and for your support of the read-along. We really appreciate that. And Zed, we'll see if we can find an answer to your question. Is Obit, the documentary, streaming?
I believe so. I believe it's streaming on the usual places. Amazon, I believe, is one, but you should be able to pull it up on the website, which is obitdoc.com.
Great. And Paula shared a link to that website as well, obitdoc.com. So Jenna said that it looked amazing. Jonathan Borstein, great program. Joan is going to go back and read some of those obits. Ingrid appreciates the reminder of obit. Really looking forward to seeing it. Thank you for the interview. And Margot, thank you for your body of work as well.
Thank you.
We can't thank you enough. I'll make a few quick announcements. Margalit, if you can hang out backstage for just a few minutes, we will close out the show. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and make sure that you join us next week for Philip Bump, a special WAPO read-along. Shree will be back hosting, and we will be interviewing Philip Bump. I want to give a shout out to our production team, in particular Paula Kiger. Great job keeping an eye on all the streams. We were on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We were on my Facebook page, Margalit's Facebook page as well. A number of people leaving comments, so thank you for that. And we also want to give a shout out. Carla Baranauckas puts out the Local Connection, a newsletter every week with great story ideas and pro tips for local reporters. You can find it at bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. And with that, Susan said wonderful talk. Thank you, Susan. Appreciate it. And to everyone who watched, if you joined us halfway, as soon as we're done, you'll be able to find the show on the same channels, on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, on the same links. It's also on our digimentors.group website. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for spending another Sunday morning talking about the New York Times, talking about the great work that's going on. And one last plug for The Confidence Men, this great book by Margalit Fox, How Two Prisoners of War Engineered the Most Remarkable Escape in History. If you saw it earlier, they used a Ouija board, and we certainly want to give a shout out to Matilda. Margalit, want to show us Matilda again real quick?
Mrs. Milligan. She has no first
Milligan,
name.
sorry.
Mrs. Yeah, it's Timesy, and we use the honorific, so it's Mrs. And so goodbye from me. Thank you. Goodbye from Mrs. Milligan.
And goodbye to everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Diana and Susan and Patricia. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.